I continue to work on my hypothesis that 0 is the number that is best suited to represent infinity. Though it is often assumed that true infinity is a concept and cannot be represented by a number, this is somewhat of a limited view, and at the same time, all the more reason that 0 should best represent infinity. In looking at a number line, with negative and positive integers, 0 is the balance or the center. This is very important in electricity and temperature, and is imperative to the science of physics and engineering. Without 0 it all crumbles. We humans tend to discount or dismiss things we cannot quantify or put any specific value on. The way we treat 0 is much the same way as we treat the idea of intelligent design. We will go out of our way to discount the usefulness of the concept when the concept itself provides us some insight into its relevance. All cultures use it, it's as old as society, and so why would an intelligent creature ponder something for so long and in such a way if it weren't important? I propose that much like 0, the act of considering it makes it something, and thus it is no longer nothing. This is one of the biggest quandaries of the Big Bang theory, is scientists have not been able to recreate a literal nothingness in the laboratory, because it is changed by those who are trying to create it. Read that again. It is changed by those who are trying to create it. So perhaps 0 also could represent, philosophically speaking, intelligent design. A referee who does not take away or add to anything but is required in order for us to transform to our negative or positive counterpart. When we realize our negative or positive counterpart, we become one with 0, so to speak. The second most creative number is 1 because though it makes up every other number, it is made up of no other number and is unique in its own right. Much like we humans are made in the image of the 0, 1 with the 0, ironically binary. So when considering this, I have broken it down into two subsets of infinity. These infinities of course have a beginning. That is negative infinity and positive infinity. On a seesaw you are either up or down. But there is that specific spot in between, or if you catch it right, in its pivot, you can balance. Mathematically this would be 0. Philosophically or theologically you could say this is intelligent design. I will not call it scientifically defined as such, because science does not like to embrace that which it does not find means to test or prove. Having grown up in the Catholic faith, I can tell you that ironically, the Church often feels the same way, in trying to determine if something is a miracle or not. In my hypothesis, the center or balance of things, where it is the pivot of 2 points or not influenced by either point nor influencing either points, would be the equivalent of intelligent design. There is some rationale, albeit not observed yet, to why it is always at the center. The negative or positive infinity is what I call creative design. It's that which we can manifest. It takes the concept of yin and yang and expounds upon it, by reflecting the fact that we can take what may be considered as negative and make it a positive. Likewise, we can take a positive thing and make it negative. Sometimes you need freezing temperatures to preserve food, and you will later need very hot temperatures to cook. They both serve their purpose, but ultimately how they are affected and how they will come to affect others, comes down, or up, to how they are used. We affect the value of any given thing, or we take away value from any given thing. It is based on our own individual creativity. When we understand this, as well as our need to not only appreciate the 0, but try to mimic its balance as best as possible, then we can be said to have a binary understanding, philosophically speaking. So, of course, if we have a binary understanding, then that understanding must have an alter ego, which we shall call the binary dilemma. You could think of it as the reflection in the mirror where things are backwards, leaving us perplexed. or the negative image from a picture. In fact, at one point in our history many people did not have their pictures taken because in seeing a negative, they were sure that their soul was being taken when they took the picture. It was the negative that helped us better see the image on the Shroud of Turin. Later we would find that though we could not recreate any hypothetical trick that would create such an image, we could see great similarities between the image on the Shroud of Turin and the silhouettes left on the walls found in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, created from the very powerful and bright blast of the atomic bombs. Ironically, the description of the Ark of the Covenant was found to have a very similar design that used the same material one might use back then, if they were going to build something to transport radioactive material. But I digress, and that is a subject for another discussion. My point being is, when we look carefully at any theological text, we can find some correlations with history and science. In terms of society and ethics, the best example to consider for binary dilemma would be the invention of the car, and its influence on social behavior and norms. When the car was first introduced, it was advertised as being a great solution to the high number of travel-related deaths. I need not point out the irony of that. Would one consider the number of travel-related deaths today proportionately? Also, when one considers the fact that at the time the car came out, most of society traveled by horse, and so only the wealthy could afford this new thing called the automobile. Juxtapose that to the present, where most people have owned a car or currently own at least one, but only the wealthy can be found to own horses which are now used more as a recreation. In between these two observations, was a pivot where the dynamics were transformed. Their poles were reversed, so to speak. If one scenario is problematic, but is a direct opposite of an initial scenario which was better suited for society, then you can say you have a binary dilemma. Another example would be the transformation of the Republican Party of today, from the Republican Party that was in power during the Civil War. There are many differences in the two forms of the Republican Party, and to this very day many debate the point at which it began to change. Again, this would be called the pivot. Depending on your political ideology, you may see the current state of the Republican Party as being a problematic creative design versus the old state of the Republican Party. If one were trying to remedy a problem of this fashion, then they would need to first understand where the pivot, or the balance of that particular matter was. Again, using the Republican Party, many believe that the point where the South switched from primarily a Democratic stronghold to a Republican stronghold, was at the point when George Wallace stood in the door of the University of Alabama, to block African Americans from attending the college. At the time George Wallace was the Democratic governor of Alabama, and his act of protest was in direct opposition of the President of the United States, who too, was a Democrat. Because of the strong-held differences of political philosophy regarding civil rights, there was a break in certain philosophies that caused many to leave the Democratic Party and to join the Republican Party. This, of course, was not the first time in American history that there was an evolution of a party. So perhaps, when we view problems of any type, whether they be family, marriage, etc., through the binary understanding, we will have a better chance of resolving the problems because we have identified 2 points, and the need to find where their pivot was. By understanding the point where everything changed, you can break it down even further, to also realize what caused that change. And in breaking it down, one will find that in all cases, what caused that pivot was either internal or external. Again, using a seesaw as an example, whether something goes up or down will depend on either the two participants or an outside force. But for now, I will rest this part of the hypothesis, as it is the main foundation that will lay the way for future positions and conclusions. The hypothesis of infinity's balance. Part 2. I wanted to expound upon the potential benefits of the concept of zero representing the balance, or pivot of infinity, as it can pertain to theology, philosophy, ethics, and intelligent design. And this part will focus on the benefits and power of creative design, or as I like to call it, manifest destiny. This may be the closest attempt anyone has ever made to try calculating philosophy in order to turn it into a science that helps us better understand theology. In my initial summary of my hypothesis, I use the example of zero acting as somewhat of a godforce, by which all things must go through mathematically in order to transform to their negative or positive counterpart. I referred to it as an amendment to the philosophy of yin and yang. I also compared the unique number 1 to the unique individuality and free will of humanity. But I would like to expand upon that, and I will do so by using the religion I practice as I proceed in this part of my hypothesis, since I know it better than the others. I am confident, though, you could find comparisons in Buddhism, Taoism, and other religions as well. For example, most societies agree that we must ethically be very cognizant of our ripple effect on others. At the same time, our parents probably raised us so that we did not think we could get away with making excuses about our mistakes, by recollecting some past trauma or injustice done against us. We still have to hold ourselves responsible for the things that we do wrong, and we cannot blame it on our childhood, or traumas, etc. It is important we don't become the story we tell, so to speak. I often say that it is ironic, that we have to be so careful with our ripple effect, yet at the same time we cannot excuse our flaws simply because of the waves that have come crashing into us. But that really is a profound way to view it, and a very useful one as well if practiced properly. This could work in conjunction with my observation that what makes the most unique number only second to zero, is the fact that it makes up all other numbers, but it is not made up of any other numbers. Similarly, we as humans are unique individuals, not made up by any given society alone. However, society as a collective is always made up by each individual united. Democracy relies upon this approach. I often say that no one man can change the world and no one world can change a man. Just as you cannot make someone happy. At best you can only inspire or influence the decision to be happy. And, we sit on the number line closest to the pivot, or the godforce symbolically speaking. So with this in mind I would like to establish a statement that should act as a working reference of the overall philosophy I'm presenting. That statement is this. Zero is to infinity, what humility is to humanity. And when realizing this, we may come to find that the better we master our creative design, the closer we get to realizing the purpose and meaning of intelligent design. What I mean by this, is the same thing we mean as Christians when we say, "There by the grace of God go I." It requires us to ask ourselves, are we free of sin so that we may cast the first stone? No. In the New Testament, that point is repeated over and over again. That we are not to judge lest we be judged. Only the godforce can do that. If we are to judge anything, it is only ourselves, because that is what we can control. As Mark Twain said, I find the harder I work, the luckier I get. As I alluded to in my initial summary, when we recognize our negative or positive counterpart, we can be said to be one with zero or the godforce. Positive 1 plus negative 1 balances out. Philosophically, I am of the opinion that we humans spend more time looking for the devil out the window than we do in the mirror. As they say, everyone is innocent on the inside. We often feel that our crime is different from everyone else's. Perhaps this is what keeps justice blind. Scientifically, this is why we cannot recognize our own voice, and it sounds awkward when we hear it on recording. This is because we are the only ones who hear our own voice the way we do. What we hear when we listen to a recording of our speaking is the way the rest of the world hears us. So what makes it different for us versus everyone else? We hear ourselves internally as well as externally. Therefore, it can be said that we often have double standards or hypocrisy because we consider our fears and our reasoning internally and we become biased. This is the problem that we face in society, whether it be governments, communities, indeed even churches, which are often fragmented. The primary argument for artificial intelligence is that it takes opinion and emotion out of analytical reasoning. But is that really always a good thing? When one considers the new discovery of quantum entanglement, or the mystery of dark matter, then we cannot rule out the possibility that the universe does not rely upon logic alone. Perhaps it does indeed have a heartbeat of purpose. As Gandhi said, "Be the change you want to see in the world." Overcoming our biases, or our selfishness, is the primary ability required in heroism, charity, and activism. The firefighter knows the risk of saving another life. Dr. King knew it wasn't always easy to remain peaceful in the face of violence. If studied properly and practiced equally with such devotion, the teachings of Christ allude to this very point. Turning the other cheek simply stops the cycle of violence. It is merely sacrificing oneself in order to change something for the better, or to preserve something helpless or meek. It requires us to step outside of ourselves for the sake of others. You cannot fight fire with fire. This is why the New Testament changes the philosophy of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and rather asks us to remain humble in our assessment and treatment of our fellow humans. If we do this, then we can expect the same in return more frequently. In this way, it depends on the very analytical method of cause and effect, and a reaction for every action. Yet it goes against the grain of logic, and requires us to have a deeper understanding of our reasoning. To run into a fire and possibly risk dying to save a stranger, on its face is technically insanity. But we have to have faith in a bigger purpose. Many will say this is a matter of perception or perspective, and indeed it is. If someone walks out of my line of sight so that I no longer see them, then I do not technically know that they still exist. But I have faith that they do. If my wife goes to work, I have faith that she made it safe and sound and she will come home at her normal time. I don't have any concrete proof from a scientifically methodical approach, but it is a safe assumption. So in this way, we all practice faith to some degree. That is the standard by which we function as a civil society. One that we cannot quite define or quantify in a definitive concrete manner. Some may call it morals or integrity. Whatever one calls it, it is often abstract. This is the nature of humanity, with our loyalties, our obligations, and our philosophies that separate us from other species. In closing this part of my hypothesis, I wanted to point out something I found very fascinating. In the New Testament, Jesus is often found working with the Gentile, the lepers, or pointing out the good attributes of the tax collector, and even the bad son. He can also point out the lesser qualities of the good son, or even the widow. In other words, he would tell two sides of every story so that nobody ever felt they were necessarily self-righteous. We Christians believe that we all fall short of God's glory, just as much as the one falls short of the balance of zero. A true saint always knows they're a sinner, and a true sinner always thinks they're a saint. We are always either on the positive or negative side of that balance, and it is quite a philosophical tight wire. But the remarkable part is that one of the most common questions Jesus asks when offering parables is, "Who was in my Father's favor?" Scientifically, you could say that the comparison would be posing a question to an elementary student along the lines of, if I need to preserve meat, then which temperature would be better suited? A negative degree or positive degree Fahrenheit? You might then pose the question, if I want to thaw the meat, which way should the temperature go? Would a positive or a negative degree Fahrenheit be more appropriate for cooking it? That would be the scientific equivalent of what Jesus was doing. Just as much as we know the difference between the ill intention of murder versus defending one's life by having to kill an intruder. It comes down to our intent and what our intention's purpose is. In the Christian faith, we resolve this dilemma by understanding that no sin is greater than another sin by the sin alone. Calling someone a fool versus the act of killing someone. What defines the egregious nature of any given sin is the intent, or the heart of it. Likewise, it also depends on our ability to recognize the sin, and reconcile that realization with ourselves in order to prevent it from happening again. I personally find that what I fear more than the sins I know I commit, is the possibility I commit sins that I am not even aware of. To guard against that, would require me to step outside of myself and to reflect internally to find the pivot. This is what is meant when someone says they have found their balance or their inner peace. I once proposed that there were two types of law-abiding citizens. There are those who follow the law because they fear the consequences, and then there are those who follow the law because they understand the need for it and respect it. Only one would likely become dangerous if anarchy set in. I also pointed out once that there are some individuals who believe the world ends the day they die. This could be said to be true, if we're looking at it from the perspective and the perception of the individual, where in their interpretation, they are the master of their own universe. If they close their eyes, the world goes away. But we should tread carefully with that idea, because though it is a normal reality for some to view it this way, to be so quick to accept it as healthy from an ethical standpoint might very well put us on a fast track to becoming a narcissistic society. And that would not bode well for our preservation as a species. Much of what Jesus taught was a Judeo-Christian philosophy that preceded the very same philosophy found in the lyrics of the Beatles themselves. I am, he is, you are, she is, you are me, and we are all together. I couldn't agree more. If you show me a racist man drowning, with only a black man on the shore, I will show you one black man that racist loves. And that is at the heart of why we are told to do unto others as we would have them do unto us. Humility is the guiding principle of all peace. And we must love life in order to be able to step outside of our own, in recognition of our neighbors. Nobody loves you when you're down and out, as they say, yet how quickly we often forget when we get back up and in again. I find it beautiful that the potential key to our harmony and unity and peace as a world, may very well depend on our ability to be individual creators. Thinking of ourselves as our own government. All good leaders are servants. Likewise, though not everyone is a business, everyone is a customer at some point. Answer: when business operates with this in mind, they are more likely to succeed. But to best sum it up, as Bob Dylan once sang, you're going to have to serve somebody. It may be the devil, or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. And it is really a complicated and heart-wrenching process, trying to learn that knowledge of what is good and what is evil, and when something is right and when something is wrong. Much of it requires us to strengthen our ability to empathize and sympathize. Sometimes selflessness may not seem to have any logical reasoning. Sometimes, The justification for doing unto others cannot be quantified from a transactional approach. So then we have to ask ourselves, who would be in our Father's favor? What would our balance, or our pivot, have us do? The hypothesis of infinity, Part 3. Intelligence design as heard by cultures, defined by societies. Once we find a way to make the atheist appreciate God, the same way God loves the atheist, then we will have found the path to peace and solidarity. And those two joined make prosperity. Quote, Stephen Everett Jr. Much of what makes us jealous, fearful, suspicious, or paranoid, is the fact that we understand the full potential and capability of the ill will of humanity, simply because we have done it ourselves. And because we have done it and know how easy it is to do, we sometimes live in fear that someone else knows this as well, and may seek to do it against us. Or worse, that we may be revealed in our guilt of having done it. The jealous husband is often a husband who is cheating. If I want to understand my enemy, then I need to understand that which I despise about my enemy, that is within me as well. I like to say, there are only two types of people in the world. The guilty, and those that haven't been caught yet. 10 Fear thou not, for I am with thee, be not dismayed, for I am thy God, I will strengthen thee, yea, I will help thee, yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. 11 Behold, all they that were incensed against thee shall be ashamed and confounded, they shall be as nothing, and they that strive with thee shall perish. 12 Thou shalt seek them, and shalt not find them, even them that contended with thee, they that war against thee shall be as nothing, and as a thing of naught. 13 For I the Lord thy God will hold thy right hand, saying unto thee, Fear not, I will help thee. Isaiah 41, 10-15. Let us use this current event as an example. Conservatives traditionally are pro-life. Liberals traditionally are pro-choice. Which one is right, and which one is wrong? Both. Because neither are the Godfus, zero or intelligent designer, and both can be found on either side of the God force, at any given point with any given perspective. This is where the problematic abstract comes into play. You may wonder how this is possible. The same way even a broken clock is right at least twice a day. Because we focus so much on the why, that we forget to pay attention to the most important part. The how. And this speaks to the intent, or the hearts of the intention. Does our how speak more to our own internal selfishness, or are we seeking to resolve the matter for the best outcome for all parties involved? Two very universal, well-known philosophies come into play here. It's not what you say, but it's how you say it. Or, it's the thought that counts. The pivot of this particular issue is to find where we have a commonality and shared belief, but where at that point, we break off and we have differences on how to go about satisfying our belief. What is the dividing line for our belief? Well, it is personally my belief, as a Christian, that if we are following the doctrine of Christianity, then we understand it to be God's responsibility and power to determine the dividing line, not ours. Again, using the example of a number line, the number 15 cannot just determine itself to be 0 in order to stop something it doesn't agree with. Because to do so would be saying that you are the determining factor between the negative and the positive integers. As a Christian, the first will use several verses to demonstrate a theological perspective. 21 And he looked up and saw the rich putting the gifts into the treasury. 2 And he saw also a certain poor widow putting in 2 mites. 3 So he said, Truly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all. For all these out of their abundance have put in offerings, for God, but she out of her poverty put in all the livelihood that she had. Luke 21, 1-4. 23 Therefore if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee. 24 Leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way, first be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. Matthew 5:23-24. Answer Even though a number on a number line will either be even or odd, we as humans are ever changing. We are not a set number that remains the same all the time. So sometimes we are even, and sometimes we are odd. Sometimes we are negative, and sometimes we are positive. And when we are always aware of this in how we think of ourselves and how we treat others, we are best balanced, or one with the zero. What does the Bible say about our enemies? What does Christ say about our neighbor? You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Psalm 13:5-25 And, behold, a certain lawyer stood up, and tempted him, saying, Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? 26 He said unto him, What is written in the law? How readest thou? 27 And he answering said, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. 28 And he said unto him, Thou hast answered right, this do, and thou shalt live. 29 But he, willing to justify himself, said unto Jesus, And who is my neighbor? 30 And Jesus answering said, A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment, and wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. 31 And by chance there came down a certain priest that way, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. 32 And likewise a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him, and passed by on the other side. 33 But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him. 34 And went to him, and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. 35 And on the morrow when he departed, he took out 2 pence, and gave them to the host, and said unto him, Take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. 36 Which now of these 3, thinkest thou, was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves? 37 And he said, He that showed mercy on him. Then said Jesus unto him, Go, and do thou likewise. Luke 10:25-37. So, in closing, we have to ask ourselves, if for example we are Christian, then who do we believe God is speaking to, or is representing, when God prepares a feast before our enemies? We must know that the possibility is, God is reassuring our enemies in doing this. The only way we can grow is to worry more about who we are than who our enemy is. And part of who we are when we are at our best, recognizes and empathizes with the endeavors and flaws of our enemy, and their fears as well. Perhaps the fence is the ugliest thing to ever scar our landscapes, simply because we no longer know whether we are keeping something out or keeping something in. While the greatest warrior may be any given society's hero and savior, the one true hero to any great warrior is the diplomat. Because no great warrior wants to spill blood, just to be defined as a warrior. And as to the original example I offered regarding the topic of abortion, and who I think is correct any given time or in their point, I will offer this quote by a good man who was a monk. A man who understands that at the root of suffering is often desire. And the problematic dilemma is how to seek living a life without desire, without desiring to do so. Anyone who is humble but still super accomplished, super recognized, renowned, has status, and has every reason to not have to be humble if they don't want to, but they still choose to be humble because they value that humanity is connected, that we're all on the same level as humans. That humility is what wins my heart. Jay Shetty.